Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great and distinguished honor of interviewing Dr. Frederick Buskey, who is the founder of Strategic Leadership Consulting, where he helps assistant principals spend less time on fires and invest more time with teachers. Oh, how I wish I had someone like him when I was an AP. He is also the host of the Assistant Principal podcast, dedicated to improve the life and leadership of APs everywhere. Dr. Frederick Buskey, who are you?
Efrain, I've been waiting to answer that question for 2 weeks. You sent me these questions in advance and I scribbled, I have notes on every other thing, and I still haven't figured this one out. I think it's such a great question and powerful question. And I thought about, well, I'm a father and a husband, but I only feel like that's one layer. And this question can get really deep. And I haven't figured it out. And maybe that's the answer, right? I'm still traveling. I love backpacking. So I use the hiking and journey analogy a lot. So I'm just on a journey, and sometimes I think about how we spend our whole lives kind of, we build on that childhood and then we walk away from that, and I feel some days like I'm coming back. I'm trying to journey back to who I was as a child, because I think that's who we were, and we pick up all the garbage along the way.
Amen. That is probably the wisest answer I have received with this question. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So, for the listeners and viewers of the show, can you please walk us through your professional trajectory up to this point?
So I had 17 years in P-12 education. I began as a coach, a physical education teacher, and then moved into special ed and then middle school history. And that was probably my favorite teaching assignment. I was just so fortunate to be part of a really high performing middle school team where we did integrated thematic units and we had academic performances and all kinds of really cool stuff. And then from there, I moved into county office role of special education coordinator. So that was my administrative experience. At that time, I went and started working in a different district for my mentor, Dr. Jan Osborne, and he encouraged me to get my doctorate. So I went through doctoral program, and then from the doctoral program, I invested 13 years of my life helping to design, teach, and lead principal licensure programs at Western Carolina University and then finally Clemson. And in 2018, I pre-tired from Clemson University so that I could start strategic leadership consulting and just focus more of my attention in schools, working with practicing school leaders and taking all those ideas that I had had over the years and the many more ideas that I stole from other people, and just trying to put them together into really simple frameworks that could help the people that are doing the work have better lives.
So let's unravel, like, let's unpeel that onion. Why did you become a teacher?
Long pause, right? So I played high school football. I didn't like school. I went to a really elite academic public high school in San Francisco, but I didn't like school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I loved playing football. 99% of my graduating class went on to college, Stanford and Cal and places like that. I was the 1%. I worked in a shoe store, but I went back that fall after my senior year and started helping my football assistant coaching my football team. And I loved that. So then I went to Humboldt State University. I played 4 years of football there. I intended to be a football coach. And I remember my junior year, I had a class with Dr. Kelly, and he said, as a coach, you can impact those 10, 15, 20, 40 kids that are on your team. But as a PE teacher, you're probably going to touch every single kid in the building. And that really lit me up. And I think was a big transition point for me, seeing myself not just as wanting to be a coach, but I wanted to be a teacher. And yeah, and I just loved it. I've loved every aspect of coaching and teaching, except fighting against the system.
So, talking about the system, what did you learn in your role as a special education director?
I was really fortunate to have a fantastic mentor, and he's the kind of person that wouldn't just tell me what I wanted to hear, but he would tell me what I needed to hear. When I started that job, I just thought that if everyone in the world would just think like me, we would be okay. So I cared about people, but I was always trying to convince them of thinking in the way I did, doing things the way I thought they should be done. And over time and lots of patience and hard lessons, what Jan helped teach me was that it wasn't about me. And and at that same time as I was going through that doc program, I had an ethics class early on, and I read this article by Milton Myeroff, and it's called On Caring. And I would encourage people to go, you can type in quotes, On Caring, and you'll pull up this Myeroff article. And what Myeroff said was, if you really care about people, then you're going to help them grow in the way that they want to grow. Your job as a leader is actually to empower them to have agency in their own lives and to grow. And so I viewed myself as a caring person, but reading that article made me come face to face with the idea that how I had been leading wasn't really caring, right? Because it was about me, not about others. So with Jan's tutelage and patience and reading things like that, I began to make that pivot and realize it's not about me. And so then I could start listening to people. I could start asking the right questions, listening to people, and becoming a better servant.
Amen. Now that you say that, um, of the experience of leading without caring, I think that is a very good summary of when I began as a school leader. And it's not like, I'm sure that you didn't mean that you were this evil person that you just don't care in people's lives. It's just that, at least in my experience, when I did my studies to become an administrator, it was very focused in scores, numbers, moving the school forward, making the school A, B, and C. And the humanity of the teacher was an afterthought. As a person working in universities, supporting people who were going to become principals and APs and directors, what experience did you bring with you to the consulting world, and how do we improve graduate programs for educational leaders so there's more caring about the teacher first before the numbers and the scores and the prestige that at least I was told to look after?
Yeah, so that's a journey. The the first part of it for me is that I stole relentlessly from administrators. I was never a building level administrator. I went from being a teacher to being county level special ed coordinator. And I actually think that's been a huge strength because I can never work with principals and assistant principals and say, well, this is the way I did it. So I have stolen from all the best principals I've met, and I've learned from people that weren't the best. And so understanding that I'm taking other people's ideas, and then I have the privilege to have the time to think about what they're doing and to look at what the other people doing, and looking for patterns and bringing stuff together that way. So that's one piece of it, is just stealing the good stuff from everybody. A second piece of it for me has been watching us go through this pandemic, because Efrain, I was the kind of person that I would put my emotions in a box, right? The world could be falling apart at home. I would go into school and I'll put it all on a box, or at least that's what I told myself, right? I thought I was continuing to perform, and probably in retrospect, I wasn't. But what the pandemic laid bare was we can't do that. right? We bring ourselves to our work, we bring ourselves into school, and kids bring themselves into schools. So that's one piece of that humanity that we have to, that's one reason we have to embrace the humanity. The other thing that has pivoted for me as well, partly because of that, but partly because of leadership turnover, is I used to think that we needed purpose driven organizations, purpose driven schools, right? That's the answer. So when you were talking about a school driven by test scores, and we see that a lot, we see people mix up the evaluation for the purpose. But I think we're struggling so much with staying true to purpose right now that we have to go to people. It's people before purpose, or as my mentor said, people are the purpose. So it's not even about that school vision, that school mission. What school leaders need to understand now is you're probably not going to be in that school 5 years from now. Like, that's sad. And we'd like to think that people stay longer. But if you look at the turnover, it's 3 to 5 years. So you're not going to be there. So if you want to have a lasting impact, it's not pressing yourself on your people, it's empowering your people to be able to sustain their vision of their work. Because if you go in and you help teachers with their vision, they're going to be good. The school's going to be good. They got into this because they love kids. But if we press to that external vision, well, that's subject to the politics and the evaluation and different leaders coming in, and it's just a mess. So I think I answered the question.
Amen. This is a masterclass. I appreciate that. More that I appreciate it. Thank you. So, like in Back to the Future, Frederick, if you could go back in time to any point in your professional career, what would the Frederick of today tell the Frederick of back then?
I wish I had learned that lesson, that if I really cared for people, I would nurture them in the direction that they wanted to go. I wish I had learned that a lot earlier. And I wish I had invested in my colleagues more. I'm a leader, and I've led programs wherever I've gone. I led my grade level when I was an eighth grade teacher, but I did not positively lead my colleagues in the rest of the school. I just focused on my stuff, and I dug in and I worked hard and I loved people. But if you were outside of my immediate circle, I didn't care. I didn't invest. So I wish I had done more.
Thank you. I love when leaders are self aware, that at some point we were somewhere, and we definitely were never perfect. And it's those roadblocks that made us stronger today. Thank you for that reflection. I appreciate it. Frederick, if you're going to gift someone that you love or appreciate two books, one fiction and one nonfiction, which one will those books be?
So my fiction book is The Hobbit, and I feel like I should have something better than that, but fantasy is a place that I go to escape, because the world is complex and full of shades of gray, and it seems like the good guys don't always win. So for me to recharge, I like to go to fantasy. And I love The Hobbit because it's a story about an unlikely hero who has an impact on the world that's much bigger than himself. And he's stumbling through and bumbling and trying to figure out the whole time. So I guess I relate to some of that.
Beautiful.
The nonfiction book that has made the biggest impact on me is Ethical Leadership by Jerry Starrett. Some people, it's a common book to read in school admin programs. Some people may have encountered it, but Jerry talks about kind of three fundamentals of ethical leadership. The first one is presence, and then authenticity, and then responsibility. And the more that I read that book, the more that I taught it, the more that I saw what it did for my students, just the more powerful I think it is. And just starting with being present, right? I think that's the challenge. That is the number one challenge for assistant principals and principals, because there are all these things competing for your attention, not just your time, but your attention. And so even when you're with somebody, you're still checking through that to do thing and thinking about the other things. but to be fully present is a tremendous gift. And so that's huge. And then how do we enact our authenticity? How do we stay authentic to our values in a profession that really is hammering a lot of what we all believe right now? It's hard out there. And then you tie that to the responsibility. So that's a great book. I'm going to add one more too, if I can,
Go for it.
especially if you have listeners that are starting to enter the second half of their career, getting into that 20th year. I would encourage you to look at the book, The 100-Year Life. It's a 700-page book. It should be about a 100-page book. But if you can work through it, the fundamental premise is that most of us are probably going to live into our 80s or our 90s. And instead of just working and do our 35 years and then be done, which probably fiscally in the end wouldn't be sustainable. We need to be thinking about our lives as a series of different careers, not just one and done. And that's why I always tell people I pre-tired from Clemson. So I took the step from one career into another career. And that's been really important for me. And the thing that the book did was to help me think about all of the different assets and capital that I accumulated through my first career, and then think about how do you put that together in your second career. So for people, trying to think about what's next, it's worthwhile to invest in.
Beautiful. I love those selections. The what came to mind with ethical leadership in the part of being present. I listened to a Simon Sinek interview, and he says that he interviewed some sort of general, and he said that he knows someone who is a leader because when they ask you how are you, they mean it. They really want to know how are you. They are just not saying how are you, good, 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 right? They really mean it. If they stop to ask you, it's because they mean it. And about the 100 years life is interesting because I have been reading lately about longevity, and that we are so pre-designed to connect our life with just one job, and when that job ends, then life ends. And no, when you retire, you still can have 10, 20, 30, 40 more years. What are you going to do with that life, and how do you bring your health and your good habits with you to continue living the life that you wanted to live? Thank you so much for sharing, Frederick. Appreciate it. So, who is or who are your biggest influences?
Mm. So number one, I think, is my mom. And I grew up in a single parent household, and my mom nurtured my creativity at every step. And we had friends that were artists. And so I grew up in a community of creative people. And I didn't really understand how important that was or how much it meant to me until just the last couple years. When I founded Strategic Leadership Consulting, I knew I wanted to be a person that creates really good tools and powerful messages for people. So I embraced that role of being creative and being a creative. And the more I talked with others about that, the more I realized how much of that creativity has been beaten out of other people. So I really credit my mom for sustaining that in me and giving me the tools to believe in myself as a creative person for all these years. And then the other big person is my wife. And again, I know that sounds kind of cliche, but I can get pretty full of myself. I can believe everything I'm doing is great, and I can drift from that core purpose of serving others to thinking that it's about me. And she just models humanity and caring and keeps me grounded and keeps me focused on the importance of serving others. So those are the two.
Two women as influence. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. How fortunate you are. So, many of us, you're talking about, right, that sometimes we think our stuff doesn't stink. Um, let's talk about imposter syndrome. At some point, we all feel at times that we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, skinny, tall, handsome, etc. How do you address imposter syndrome in your professional and personal life?
And I have suffered really badly from imposter syndrome, and not just you're not worthy, but the kind of imposter syndrome that attacks who you are to your core, right? And there's times in my life I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and all the negativity just comes flooding in. So I've dealt with that. I'm really happy with where I'm at right now. And so there's 3 things that I've done in the past 2 years that have made a massive difference for me. First is I named my imposter voice, and I call it my Fred voice because my name is Frederick, and that's what I like to be called. Fred is my junior high name with all of the baggage and horror that comes with being in junior high.
That's so smart.
Yeah, and so when Fred starts talking to me, I can name him as a piece of me, but not the piece that I choose to be. The the next thing I do is I write affirmations. So if Fred says you're stupid, I will go to my book. I have a book. I keep it on my usually keep it right here on my desk, and I'll write down every negative comment and then I write the counterpoint to it. And when you write an affirmation, I think it's important not just to write the opposite of what your voice is telling you, but to also cite the evidence, right? So I'm
Wow.
not stupid. I have a doctoral degree. I'm not stupid. I have published articles. I have a book. I have all the I'm not stupid. That's a ridiculous, ridiculous thing for Fred to say about me. And then when I catch myself, when I catch Fred talking to me and whispering in my ear, I go right back to those affirmations and I say them 3 times. Like, no, I mean, dude, you're wrong. I'm smart. I'm smart. I'm smart. And so that's been helpful. But the other thing that has turned imposter syndrome on its head is something that I heard Seth Godin say. And he said, imposter syndrome comes up when you're pushing your edge. When you're working at the very edge of your abilities, that's when imposter syndrome really rears up. So if you never have imposter syndrome, you are never pushing your edge.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when Fred starts telling me I can't do something, I'm thinking, "Hey, I that means I'm growing, I'm getting better, I'm taking risk, I am gonna lean into that." So that has been done a 180 for me. Like, bring it on, Fred, because that means that I'm pushing my edge.
Wow, I am so impressed. I have practiced mindful meditation for a while now, and one of the challenges that Sam Harris give is like try meditate and try not to think about anything, and you will realize how impossible it is because the brain is such a magnanimous thing that, but a very stoic way, I believe, is what you were doing. Is like, you know what, I'm gonna label that little voice inside me and I'm going to tame it. I'm going to do something about it. And that is a very proactive move. And I think I'm going to emulate it.
Yeah.
I really, really like labeling that imposter syndrome that attacks from so many ways in the worst moments for me, for someone who deals and addresses depression and anxiety. That is key, and I think that would be a good strategy that I'm going to steal from you. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think can I add on that?
yes,
So
please.
one other thing that's happened is I've shared that with my wife and my daughter who also helps me in my business. We've talked about that. So when I feel that, I can express that to them too. And I can say, "Well, Fred is really yelling at me loudly today," and they know exactly what that means. So it makes it easier to get help and support from other people because in the end, we can't fight that alone. I mean, even with all the tricks, like, we can't make it alone. And so that's the other thing of naming it is that now I can talk about it with people and they can help me.
You instead of hiding and acting like it doesn't happen. Wow, listeners and viewers of the show, there you go. I think this is a perfect moment to take a quick pause and reflect on this new strategy that at least I learned. And let's celebrate the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
Now I'm thinking, I'm glad I never called you Fred. Frederick. So, as you know, being successful includes being on top of our productivity, but this means different things for different people. How does Frederick get organized and still have a fructiferous life?
So I'll share three big ideas and then we can dig into those. So the first thing I'm going to say is my system is perfect. Unfortunately, I am not, right? So I have a great system. Many days I'm not able to execute, and that's okay. The system's in place. The second thing is that accountability partners are just huge. I get up every morning and do yoga, and my wife is part of that. We do it together before we start our days. And if we were doing it alone, it wouldn't happen. I mentioned earlier my daughter's in my business. We have a leadership meeting every Monday at 11 o'clock, and we work through the things that the commitments that we had made before. And we begin our meetings with celebration and discussing our own personal growth. So again, that built-in accountability. And then the third thing, and this is big, and I think you're already doing this. I manage my priorities. I don't manage time. I manage my priorities because the tasks don't matter. It's not about tasks, it's about people. So what are the things I need to do to allow me to be better at impacting people's lives today? And I'll go with no more than three big rocks. And I build my day around those three big rocks. Again, I don't always execute,
Mhm.
but the system is in place. And so that makes it more likely that I'll be better at it.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack that because many viewers and listeners of this show and other similar shows, they're always looking for ways on how to. We all have the 24 hours of the day, right? But often it's so hard. People just wake up and they come to work and they don't, for example, do some kind of exercise like yoga, or they allow time to take over. So tell us, like, for example, how do you plan your week, or how do you plan your day? Like, what are the logistics? What happens behind the scenes for that to happen?
I'm a big fan of time blocking. So my calendar, I have everything blocked. If you look at my calendar on my Mac, everything's in color, and I color code my different events, but I block everything. And so Mondays are always I do a daily email. So I write a week of emails on Monday. I then record Five for Friday podcast for the assistant principal podcast because that's based on those emails. So those are logged in every Monday on my calendar. Whenever I get a task, like I wanted to prepare for this podcast and make sure that I was on point for your listeners, I put that into my schedule. I know that I have a training coming up. I build the times into my schedule where I'm going to do things. And so my schedule fills up. And then at the end of each day, well, throughout the day, when I make adjustments to what I'm doing, I change that on my calendar. So I can look back and I can tell you where I invested my time over the previous week or the previous day. And then at the end of every day, I look at tomorrow and I make sure that I've got the three big rocks, the three things that I have to get done, and that I've got those blocked in the calendar. And so then when something comes up, and it's going to change the way my calendar is structured, I actually have to move stuff around. I can't commit to doing something without having to move stuff around. And that visual and actually physical aspect of moving my things around keeps me really in tune with what my priorities are and how am I going to do my priorities. And then, okay, is this a priority? I keep having on there, I need to update this thing on my webpage, but I keep pushing it off because when I look at it compared to the other things, it's not as important.
Beautiful. I learned about time blocking from Robin Sharma, and the the quality of life that you give to yourself when you're able to plan your week, your time. I encourage my assistant principal to take blocks during the day. I mean, not like 6 hours in a day, but you can take an hour here where you put in your calendar busy. And before that, you have a to do list so you can know what you're going to do. Because if not, you spend that hour working on the to do list instead of the actual work. I think that is fundamental for having a great life. Let me ask you, going into consulting must be a big risk in terms of when you are used to work for another institution. What lessons have you learned, and what advice would you give to people who might be thinking about doing that shift?
Wow. I hmm, that's such a great question. Thank you for asking that. I think you have to have some courage, and you have to be willing to fail at a certain level. Like, I've made lots of mistakes and failed in many ways. And then in other ways, it's been a tremendous success. You have to have tremendous patience, like, because stuff is going to go bad, stuff is going to go wrong. And you can't lose sight of the mission, right? It's easy to get focused on, I need to make a living, I need to make money. But as soon as you start focusing on the money, you take your focus off, how am I serving people? How am I helping people? It's been a huge learning curve, and I'm still really struggling with how do I produce great stuff? Well, I'm producing really good stuff, and I'm not saying that for me, but the feedback I get from assistant principals, like, this really helped me. How, as a business person, how do you convert that into revenue? Because you can't keep your business open if you can't convert to revenue. So I think what I would encourage people that are thinking about making the jump is to make sure you have that part figured out before you do, because I haven't figured out yet. And so now there's stress in the business. So if you have your job, you haven't quit your day job, you're still teaching, start making revenue and start figuring out how that's going to be sustainable, and work on your marketing skills before you make that jump. I think that's important. The other thing I'll say, Frame, that the community of edupreneurs is a remarkably caring community. I'm in a mastermind with someone who's doing the exact same thing I am. We're both targeting the same audience, but there's no sense of competition, right? We're each coming at it from a different way. We're in different locations, and there's 13,000 school districts, or some huge number, right? There's no competition, and edupreneurs are beautiful people. So get involved with a group. And I know you just promo Teach Better, and they have an edupreneur group. Shout out to Jeff Gargas and the great work that they're doing. If you're thinking about making it, well, you're in there too, right? That's how we met.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good place for people to go, because you can start to learn so much from other people.
Beautiful. Being an entrepreneur is one of those things that, as an educator, often you come with no training or logistics about it, because we're just used to when the bell rings and the bell rings again, and then you go home and you work in lesson plans, and it's almost seen like an extra thing. I feel that you truly have to have a inner passion and not caring about the failures or the likes or the retweets. You have to do it because you really want it, and it might end as a success. But even if it doesn't end as a success, financially or monetarily, I think it's a success that when you're in your deathbed, you're going to be happy that you did,
Yeah.
instead of allowing imposter syndrome to say, you know what, I don't know who's going to listen to this, who's going to read my book, who's going to, because for sure you're making the difference, and you have made a difference in me, Frederick, for sure. So please keep it up. Let's talk about your podcast. So at some point you decided to use that um, like strong voice that you have to create this podcast, and you decided to target the audience of assistant principals. What is the prequel to that? How did you land it and deciding this is where I'm going to aim to support people in that field?
Working in higher ed in principal licensure programs for 13 years, I met a lot of people who've gone on to be assistant principals. And in fact, in those programs, you're not training principals, you're training people to be assistant principals. And hearing their stories and the pain and the isolation and the challenges, the incredible challenges of that job really put me in the place that those were the people I wanted to serve. I also think they're the forgotten leaders. And a few years ago, when I started the business, a lot of people were complaining about the principal pipeline, but it felt like nobody was doing anything about it. I started my business, and then the next year, Wallace Foundation and all these big think tanks jumped into that space. And that's good because we need to serve APs more. But here's the story that drives me. When I was still at Clemson, I went to check on a principal licensure intern in a small rural school in South Carolina. I go in the school, check on my intern, and then I check in on the assistant principal. I walk into her office, and immediately I know something's wrong. Like her hair's out of place. There's all these papers over her desk. Her face is flushed. And I said, Kelly, what's wrong? And she holds up that stack of yellow papers and she waves them in my face. And she says, it is 10 o'clock in the morning. I have 7 discipline referrals. Every one of these is going to take me 30 to 45 minutes, and my day's done. And she's close to tears. She said, I wanted to go in and work with teachers and do observations and coaching, and I'm done. And I said, Kelly, of those 7 referrals, how many of those are more about what the teacher's doing than than the kid is doing? And she paused and she thought, and she said, 5. 5 of 7 referrals were about the teacher, but she couldn't get in and work with the teachers because she was dealing with the referrals. And I remember leaving that school and sitting in my car and thinking, and at that point, I'd already made the decision to pre-tire. I knew I was going to do consulting, but I don't think I was just going to do consulting to kind of fill the financial gap, not because I had this tremendous passion. But I just thought about that. I said, how wrong that is, because Kelly was smart. She was enrolled in a doc program. She was, had a couple years under her belt. She knew how to coach teachers. She knew what the problem was, but she couldn't figure out the way out. So that's been the story that really drives me. That's why I niche down on assistant principals. I have a book. I'm hoping to get the publishing deal here in a week or so. And that whole book is about the stages that you have to go through to work yourself out of, going back to the top of the show. It's about managing priorities, not managing time or tasks. So there's a whole way we can do that. There are techniques that we can get there. We can build the systems, and we've been talking about some of those. So yeah, so that's why I do it. You can tell I get excited about it.
For sure, and I like the saying, when you do good things happen. The fact that this came out of a need to see, what people need support, so I'm gonna help there. It says a lot about you. What have you learned about writing a book, and what advice do you have for those who are thinking of writing a book but they have not dared to enter into that journey?
I think on one level, it's okay to spend a lot of time thinking about it. And on the other level, you have to get in and begin writing at the same time. So initially, it's not about getting the book done. I think initially it is about playing with ideas. So don't be in a hurry to finish it, but you need to commit to working on it consistently, hopefully every week. In retrospect, I wish I had blocked time every day, even a half hour every day to work on it. I had 3 iterations of the book, and I would go in spurts. So I get all fired up and I'd write a bunch, and then a couple months would pass, and then I get fired up again, but then you go back and your thoughts have changed. And And I think that's good. The book is way better now than anything I could have written 3 years ago. And so that's why I say being patient is okay. Rewriting your book is okay. In the end, what I had to do, two things. One was, again, going back to accountability partner. My wife said, "You've got to finish that book. You're leaving here for a week." And she actually booked the, what, Verbo or some, we went and found a cabin, literally a cabin in the woods. And I took my computer, no internet. I went to the cabin and all I did was write. I did nothing else. And I'd had a lot of the book at that point, but I couldn't get over the hump. So for 3 days, I just wrote, no distractions, no email, no phone calls, nothing. And that got me over that hump. And then the next part was figuring out, like, how do you get it published? And the question to answer there is, why did you write the book? And that's something that I've struggled with. I know who I wrote the book for. I know the message, but I don't know why I wrote the book. Did I write the book because I want to make money? Did I write the book because it's a business card? Did I write the book because I want to get it out in as many hands and I don't care about the money? I still haven't sorted that part out. And I think it would have helped me to be better equipped on the back end, that after I finished that book, I would have gotten it to the publisher earlier, because it's been a year since I finished the book. And I had a conversation with Will Parker, who does Principal Matters podcast,
Mhm.
and we were talking about his book experience. And so that's the other part of it. Talk with other people who have published books. Talk with people who have done it multiple ways. Will has 3 or 4 books out, and he's published each one in a different way. So he was able to give me some guidance and tell me what his best experience was. And I trust his judgment. And so then I went that route. So kind of a long-winded answer.
No, fantastic. I appreciate it. Let me ask you, Frederick, as we conclude the show, when Frederick is not on fire doing all these things, what does Frederick do for fun?
My number one passion is backpacking and hiking. We live in Western North Carolina, the heart of the Appalachians and Smoky Mountains, and it's just absolutely beautiful here. And I like to get out. We'll frequently take hikes on a weekend, take a long hike during the day. I also like to do these little 24-hour getaways. So I'll knock off a little bit early on a Friday, throw my pack on, go out onto a mountaintop and walk a few miles, camp out, be back by noon. I call it a 24-hour soul cleanse.
Wow.
So that's where I do a lot of renewing myself. We did a through hike this summer. I've wanted to do this for 38 years. For 38 years, I've put this trip off, but we finally did a 270-mile through hike of the Pennine Way in England. And
Wow.
that was just is one of the highlights of my life. And you and I can talk about more about that offline, but
Beautiful.
that's my big thing. And then I have a garden and I sometimes try to play guitar.
Wow. Multifaceted, multi-talented. Frederick, any last words for the listeners and viewers of the show?
Yeah, I just think if you put people first, and it's not even about purpose. You talked about Simon Sinek earlier, and I was actually listening to one of his talks today. And I get what he's saying with begin with why, but I think that's the same as the purpose driven school. And that was a great model 20 years ago. I don't think it's a great model today. I think we have to put people first and figure out how we take care of our people. And when we take care of our people, they then will drive the vision. They then will drive the pursuit of excellence, but we have to begin with them.
Amen. Frederick, a pleasure having you as a guest on the show.
Yeah, Ephraim, I enjoy it so much, and you are so wise, and just some of the things that you've shared with me have been so valuable, and I just appreciate the work you're doing. It's not easy work, especially being a principal and being a podcaster. So thank you.
An honor. This is my weekly professional development. And even if there's 0 listeners, 0 likes, I come out so glad that I did this. I tell the lessons learned when I with my family, with the people I lead at the school. There's always something to share and learn, and we're only better when we push our boundaries of learning. We're always in that continuous improvement process. Frederick, I hope you have a fantastic weekend with your family. You're blessed to have a supportive spouse and to have your mom as a role model. Makes it very special. Happy Saturday.
Thank you, Ephraim.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Ephraim Martinez.
Chulo.
And I love that production. Chill out.